Before starting a complex sculpture, it is wise to make some sketches of the projected piece from different angles, or to make a few clay maquettes, which are three-dimensional sketches. Before you begin, make sure you have all the necessary materials and the slip of the same clay body. Materials that you might need include a turntable, a wooden blending stick, a rib, some type of scoring tool, some carving tools, spray bottle with water, and plenty of plastic for wrapping your work when you're taking a break. Prepare the number of coils you think you will be using in one sitting. Whatever shape of clay you start with, make sure you prepare it for coiling. Before you start rolling your coils, you may want to squeeze the clay into a sausage shape or tap corners out on a table. When a piece of clay looks more or less cylindrical, you can start rolling your coil. The size of your coils depend on the size of the sculpture you might have in mind. I like keeping my coils at 1 inch thickness on the bottom of the sculpture so they can support the weight of clay built on top. As I build higher, I squeeze and pinch coils to be thinner. Keep your coils wrapped in plastic to prevent them from drying. One advantage of coiling is that it gives you considerable control over the shape of the sculpture as you go along. To start a piece of coiled sculpture, lay out the first coils in an approximation of the form of its base and develop it as you build it up. I started with an oval base, which is the shoulder circumference for the bust. If your clay is fresh out of the bag, there's no need in scoring and slipping. I add the next coil layer and blend the two together. Try not to twist the coil. Blend the two layers together. I use a wooden rounded stick to push clay from the freshest coil to the older one. This is called welding coils. Soft clay can be directly welded row into row. The strongest joints are welded on both the interior and exterior of the wall. The standard welding technique is to use one thumb or wooden stick on the inner surface, moving downward, while the fingers on the outer surface weld the clay in an upward motion. If the clay has stiffened at all, score each surface to be joined. Brush on slurry or slip, then lay the coil row and weld it. When coils are welded, the wall becomes thinner and expands outward. The more aggressive the welding, the more the walls thin and expand. Coils may need to start substantially thicker than the finished wall will be. After you welded several layers together, smooth the wall with the rib in multiple directions. Now is the time to evaluate the direction of the wall. Referring to your sketches or photographs, determine the height and the angle at which the wall curves inward towards the neck. My sketch shows different angles on each side, so I will work on each side separately. To curve the wall inward, coils need to be attached on the inside of the form. When welding and smoothing, support the wall from the inside to prevent the wall from collapsing. Clay is susceptible to sagging under its own weight. It is important to recognize when the clay is beginning to reach that point. The walls that tilt inwards are particularly vulnerable to collapsing, so every time the walls curve inwards, you need to let it dry to let it hard before you continue adding weight on top. The form I have reached that point when I cannot add any more weight on top. I need to let it dry before I start constructing the neck. But what I can do while the clay is soft is to shape it into the form I need. The bust I'm working on has some waves formed by the cloth on one shoulder. To create those waves, I manipulate the wall from both sides using both hands. I'm pushing the valley of the fold from the outside while supporting the wall from the inside. I'm pushing the mountain fold from the inside while holding the valleys in place from the outside. Clay stretches well, but it can rip if too much pressure is applied. Work on gradual expansion. You might need to run your fingers through folds several times before you achieve the desired curvature. After the clay is stiffened a bit, I can build a neck. I prep my coils and wrap them in plastic. The neck is just a cylinder, so I continue building the walls straight up from the opening in the shoulder base. The shoulder base is at soft leather hard state now, and is capable of supporting more weight. Scratch and slip the dry clay before attaching fresh coils. Once the neck is built to the desired height, I can move on to the next step in construction. To continue with the form of the face, I need to create the chin first. The chin, in this case, acts as a flange to provide a place for the construction of the face. Determine the angle of the chin and its size based on your sketches or photographs. The challenge with the chin is that it has to go out under a 45-degree angle or even lower. To achieve this, you have to work with the limitation of the clay's properties. You can attach a coil or a clay patty on the outside of the neck and wait for it to stiffen before you add another coil outward. Always support the wall from the outside so it does not collapse. After you have the length of the chin, you definitely need to let the clay stiffen and wait for the moisture content to equalize. When the chin is stiff enough to continue building on top of it, proceed to the construction of the head. I prepare my coils and focus on the egg shape of the head. Make sure you know the relationship between the length of the head and the width of the shoulders, so you don't build a head way out of proportion. The shape of the head is a tilted egg. When it sits on the neck, it appears flatter on the back and protruding on the front. When you start building the head, avoid the outward tilt of the wall on the back. The nature of the coiling process will cause the piece to flare out. To control the form, tilt your hand in the direction you want to build and keep adding coils. If this is difficult, the shape can be altered further by cutting out triangle section around the form. The walls can then be scored and slipped and pulled together. This process is called darting. Use comparative measurement to maintain the correct proportion of the head. In comparative measurement, we try to find the relative scale of any part of the figure to any other. Then make the same comparison on your piece. Here you see me comparing the height of the face to the width of the shoulder. It appears that the size of the face is the same as half the width of the shoulders, so I translate the same comparison onto the bust. This building process requires an awareness of working in 3 dimensions. If you are not used to visualizing forms this way, hand building can be an exasperating experience at first. For instance, when hand building a figure, you may concentrate on one section, only to step back and discover that the area you have been focusing on fails to work well with other parts of the piece. Most people have to make a conscious effort at first to consider their work from all angles. It helps to turn the piece frequently or walk around it often to ensure that working too long on one part will not totally change its relationship to other sections of the piece. The figure I have in mind is wearing a scarf as a headdress, which changes the form dramatically. My plan is to leave the opening on top of the cranium and establish general features of the face before I move on to the headdress. The opening will allow me to support the walls from the inside when I modify the face. Before we move on to the construction of the face, let's talk about some guidelines for developing facial structure. The central axis of the head is an imaginary line that travels through the entire head down the front of the face, dividing it vertically in half. The midline is important to determine the general location of the features of the face. The central axis starts at the top of the cranium, runs down the forehead, between the eyes, down over the bridge of the nose and lips, and the central portion of the chin. The face can be divided vertically into three more or less equal portions, called the thirds of the head. This formula is helpful to remember, especially when working from memory. Working from the chin upward, the thirds are as follows. First third from the chin line to the bottom of the nose, second third from the nose line to the top of the brow ridge, and the third third is from the brow line to the hairline. When applying these three divisions, do not neglect to include the rest of the cranium, which sweeps away from the hairline toward the back of the skull. The eyes are located approximately at the center of the head when measured from the chin to the top of the cranium. The eye line, which passes through the bottoms of the lids, will help you place the eyes in relation to the whole head, considered vertically. In a straight-on frontal view, the eyes are about the length of one eye apart from each other. Remembering this proportion will help you avoid placing the eyes too close or too far apart from each other. The human form consists of multiple different surfaces that are slanted at different angles. Learning how to measure those angles and compare them to other surfaces on the human form will enhance your accuracy when working from the model. Imagine the angles as a hand on the clock. Using the hands of the clock, you can roughly get the angles of the model's contour and translate this knowledge to your sculpture. It is also useful to compare angles within the same contour and notice the difference in angles. For example, you can compare the tilt of the nose to the tilt of the lip to the tilt of the ear and make sure that you have similar angle differences on your sculpture. The more angles you compare, the more accurate your sculpture can be. While it is essential that you learn to recognize the bony landmarks of the skull, it is sometimes easier to see the general forms of the head in a more geometric way. This can be done by breaking up the various areas of the face into a system of planes. A plane refers to any surface area within space. Once you break down the face into simpler surface areas, you have a general form from which you extract more details. For now, I'm just working on the planes of the face. I can add more clay to raise the surface or carve into it to reduce the form. Remember to score and slip the dry clay before you attach the fresh one. I support the wall from the inside every time I press from the outside to prevent clay from caving in. When I have the general form down, I can work on more details. Let's start with the eyes. Several bones of the skull contribute to the eye sockets, the two bony cavities that house and protect the eyeballs. The upper and lower eyelids are portions of the orbicularis oculi muscles that are covered with extremely thin skin. In most views, the spherical shape of the eyeball is noticeable under the shape of the lids. First, I attach a flattened sphere inside the cavity I created. From what I have, it is clear to me that I need to add more volume to the forehead and to the eyebrow ridge. Then I add flattened coils over the eyeball and under it to mimic eyelids. I only smooth out one side of the coil, the one furthest from the eyeball. My model has some loose skin which creates wrinkles. I add those by adding coils and blending them only on one side. There are many different ways to create hair with clay. It is common to add the general volume first and then carve details later. Creating complex textures is all about adding and taking away the material. In the case of my sculpture, I only have some short hair showing from under the headdress. I create the general volume of hair by adding large coils to the head. Large coils allow me to create an overall impression of the wavy form. After the form is established, I go back in and add small petal-like pieces of clay. To achieve the texture of the hair, I use a variety of techniques. I add details to the general form, I carve into the clay, and pinch the details out. Next is onto the headdress. My model has a scarf wrapped around her head, which creates a complex form with many folds. To begin, I prepare my sculpture for further building by establishing the correct angle for the headdress. I carve away all the unnecessary clay and start laying the coils down onto the wall of the head. I build the walls of the scarf up with coils, the same way I build the shoulders. When the wall of the scarf is still soft, I can shape it into some general folds. Once the clay reaches its potential for supporting more weight, I let it dry. I choose to switch the technique and build some of the scarf with slabs. Slabs help me to mimic tight folds of the scarf. I attach slab pieces on top of the wall and form them into folds. To prevent the soft slab from folding too much and breaking, I stuff the inside of the fold with the newspaper, which acts as a mini mold. I finish the headdress with a variety of techniques: coils, slabs, and pinching. Let the clay dry to leather hard every time you feel it might start collapsing or deforming under more weight. When you're done with the general construction and the sculpture is still at leather hard state, you have a chance to work on more details of the face. Let's consider the construction of the nose. The general shape of the nose is pyramidal. The surface of the nose has 4 planes: a top or front plane, which includes the bridge of the nose, 2 side planes on each side of the top plane where the nostrils are located. The bottom plane of the nose is triangular and is more noticeable when the head is tilted back. Nose shapes vary widely. When you're just beginning to construct a nose, do not focus on details, such as nostrils. Figure out the general shape first. After the nose dries a bit, you can add more clay or remove some to find correct curves of each plane. The last step would be to carve nostrils, identify the wing's tapering curve, and to carve a little depression under the nose called philtrum. Before you consider the construction stage over, examine the texture of your sculpture. The combination and juxtaposition of textures adds much more interest to your work. In this example, I have texture on a scarf, which I imprinted during the soft stage of the clay. I have the texture of the hair, which was modeled during construction. Now, when my sculpture is at leather hard, I can really work on smoothing out the skin. Also, I'd like to enrich the garment's surface and imprint some texture on it. Since the base of the sculpture is too dry to imprint the texture, I add soft clay first. I score and slip before I attach fresh clay. Now I can easily press some lace into the clay to add to the overall look of the garment. Keep your work at leather hard all the way through decorating, in case you want to carve some design. Also, keep in mind that transporting clay works best when it is at leather hard. Bone-dry clay is extremely fragile and is hard to fix if something breaks. I use Mishima decorating technique to bring out the texture of the scarf and the garment. I paint the areas with the colored slip. Then I let it dry before wiping it off from the raised areas of the surface. The trick to cleaning the colored slip is to never run the sponge over the area twice. Use different sides of the sponge to clean up the slip, and when it gets dirty, rinse it and squeeze the excess water before continuing the cleanup. If you run the sponge over the area for the second time, you transfer the color from the sponge onto the clay, which defies the whole purpose. It is also helpful to move the sponge only in one direction to emphasize the texture. I'd like the surface of the skin to have a soft satin look, so I paint the skin with several layers of terra sigillata and polish it in between layers with a chamois cloth. Terra sigillata is just a very fine particle clay slip which you can make yourself. Terra sigillata, or terra sig for short, is made by mixing a suitable clay with water and a deflocculant and leaving it to stand until the heavier particles of clay settle out. Deflocculant weakens the electrical attraction between particles of clay, thus breaking up small clumps of clay and allowing the individual particles to float freely. The deflocculant causes the finer particles to float in the water, which can then be decanted for use. In general, it is not possible to buy terra sigillata, so if you want to use it, you must make your own.